Legend here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering the Empire. And before we get into the meat of this tier list, I do need to let you guys know that this video is sponsored by Instant Gaming. So I've been partnered with Instant Gaming for quite a while now. I've used the website, purchased from it, and I've never had any issues. I've had great feedback from you guys about it, and this is just a great opportunity for those of you who don't yet have the complete Total War Warhammer experience to go and check it out, because there's no Steam sale on at the moment and there is some amazing prices here. If you've only purchased Warhammer 2 and you haven't played Mortal Empires in my opinion is the superior experience for Total War Warhammer, and currently you can get Total War Warhammer 1 for $13.13, which the Horned Rat 100% approves of. You can also pre-order Warhammer 3 for 34% off. I believe these prices here are in US dollars. Now, it's really important that you check the region that you purchase it from. You know, if you're in Europe, for example, don't purchase a North American key, and vice versa. But if you do make a blunder and purchase the wrong key and it doesn't work on your account on Steam, Instant Gaming has a really good refund policy, and you can always get your money back. And maybe next time, get the right key. So do check it out, because the stock is limited, but if you just check it out every now and again, there's different DLCs, different games always available, so it's always great if there's just nothing going on Steam, which is the case at the moment. And since we've got quite a long time before there's any new content for Warhammer 2 or 3, it might be a good idea to complete your collection now while we're waiting for like another 6 months. Anyway, let's move on to the tier list. This is based off very hard battle difficulty, legendary difficulty, campaign, no multiplayer, no mods. Your experience from it might be better than or different from mine. If I put a unit down in trash, that doesn't mean you should never recruit it if you want to recruit it. It's just that you have to work harder to get this unit in order to actually do its value. So units that end up lowing down here, it's just harder to make them work, whereas ones that end up here, it's just easier to get them to do their value. That's really what it's all about. But if you enjoy a particular unit, don't let this tier list deter you from recruiting that unit. Okay, so we're going to structure this in terms of melee infantry first, then missile infantry, melee cavalry, missile cavalry, and then artillery after that. We're going to put steam tanks in the artillery category. Okay, so melee infantry, start off with the most basic unit. We've got the spearmen. So this is a tier 0 unit, and by tier 0 I mean that you can recruit it without a barracks. All you need is a settlement that's not a ruin. That's tier 1. So very convenient to recruit, but there are 2 units that you can recruit from tier 0, the spearmen and also the archers. Now, of the 2, the archer is a superior unit, but sometimes combined arms is very effective for the Empire. So I'm going to put this one at C tier. It's like its primary role is to hold the enemy back, but they're not particularly good at it. They're low leadership. They do have decent melee defense for being a tier 0 unit. It's the kind of unit that you recruit in an emergency to fill in gaps in your army, and if it dies, you just don't cry over it. You just be like, oh well, I'll just replace you, sort of thing. Unless it was like 9 tiers of experience, which is very rare to see this unit get that much, because it has to survive and kill a lot of units, which is unlikely. But it's usually better with melee infantry in your missile-based armies, because that's the crux of how the Empire works, much like the Dwarfs, is that their best units are going to be artillery-based and missile unit-based. And so the role of melee infantry is to protect those units. Their role is not to dish out damage, because they are never going to be able to dish out as much damage as missile units, so their role is to defend. And in that regard, spear units with anti-large are better defenders than sword units. Okay, then we've got the spearmen with shield, which I'm also going to put them at C tier, because these actually require a barracks, and they're a little bit more expensive. The main benefit to them is that they have higher melee defense and, of course, have a shield. Now, a shield is very valuable in this, because there's just missile units everywhere, and being able to block about 35% of projectiles coming your way, essentially 35% missile resistance, is really helpful for holding the line, especially while you're up against a superior enemy. So, good unit, but for its price point, still a C tier unit. Then we've got swordsman unit here, swordsman with shields. There's no swordsman without shield variant. Now, I would say that this unit here is completely unnecessary, because if you need shields, you've got the spearman unit. I know it's like a tier 1 unit. Like, if we have a quick look over here, in terms of the barracks, swordsmen are tier 1. right? And the spearmen are tier 2. But if we have a look at the price point, there's very little difference between them. In fact, the spearmen with shields actually seem to be cheaper. Come on, look at it. Yeah, they actually are cheaper than the swordsman. If we have a look at their stats, we've got 32 melee attack, 32 melee defense. Now, I would say that their melee attack is irrelevant because the AI have such huge cheats that you're just not going to really be dishing out damage anyway, because their melee defense is bolstered like crazy, right? So these guys here, their job is not to dish out damage, it's to hold the line. Weapon strength of 28 versus 25. 20 melee attack, but again, they could have a melee attack of 0, it's fine, that's not important. What they need is melee defense, and spearmen with shields have a vastly superior melee defense, so there's 10 points difference there. Yeah, that's a big difference. This means there's 10% less chance of the enemy landing a hit, and that's what you need them to do. You need them to hold the line for as long as possible. Since they're 7% cheaper and can hold the line 10% better, I would vastly recommend going to Spearmen with Shields over Swordsmen. Now, the fact that they're tier 1 or tier 2, tier 1 and tier 2 is super easy to get to. It's really like tier 4 and 5 that take ages to get to. So, for a tier 1 unit, these guys here should be tier 0, and I feel like they perform at tier 2. So yeah, that's why I'm putting that under trash. Then we've got the Halberdier here. Now, the Halberdier is also a tier 2 unit, but it also requires a secondary building. Now, the blacksmith isn't a bad building to build, because if you get to tier 3 with it, you can increase your global recruitment capacity. Now, as the Empire, getting your global recruitment capacity up to crazy levels, I think the maximum you can get to is 30 global recruit slots, is really, really good, because the Empire is a faction that has to deal with emergencies constantly, and that's where global recruitment is really handy. So if there's an enemy coming that's 2 turns away, like, oh crap, I need to recruit an army, global recruit, spam whatever unit's available, armories are really important. So it's not too bad that a Halberdier does require a blacksmith here. So I would put the Halberdier at tier 2, so at C tier, similar to these units here, just because they've got the same role. They don't have shields. They do have armor piercing, so they can dish out more damage, but that's not their primary role. They need to be holding the line. It's just that it's good that they're able to dish out a little bit more damage. So for their price point and the amount of effort that's required to recruit them, I'd say they're C tier. Then we've got the Flagellants. So Flagellants are recruited from the Warrior Priest build. They're a tier 3 unit. I tend to build a lot of these Shrine of Sigmars just because it increases hero capacity, which you can now actually do that through Lord recruitment, which I'm not going to go into details with that now. But I do tend to build this a lot just because it's good to also have the Untainted, because the Empire has to deal with quite a lot of taint. So I think I'm going to put that at C tier. I've dumped on Flagellants quite a bit, but you can boost them quite a lot now, and they're quite a convenient unit to recruit. Oftentimes, because I build so many of those Shrine of Sigmars, I'm able to globally recruit these units here in 1 turn, because if you build 10 buildings of a particular unit type's recruitment, it reduces the global recruitment time by 1. So I'm often able to recruit these in 1 turn, whereas I don't usually build too many of the standard barracks before at least this point. So these are quite convenient to recruit, and the fact that they're like disposable essentially is quite useful. They're unbreakable, they dish out some damage, they're okay, they sort of perform at exactly where they should, at least in terms of everybody else in this roster. So that's where I'm going to put that. Now we've got the Empire Greatswords. Now this is one that is a little bit tricky to really get the message across as to how terrible it is, because it definitely deserves a trash spot. You might think, how could it get the trash spot? It's the elite infantry unit of the Empire. It's rubbish, and I'll tell you why. So, its price point, it is way more expensive than the other melee infantry in the roster, and that's primarily because of its high stats that don't matter that much. High armor value, they've got fairly low melee attack, to be honest. They've got anti-infantry and armor piercing, and that's really what it comes down to. But they've got really low melee defense, and they don't have shields. And shields is kind of more valuable than armor, because armor is bypassed constantly in this game, because a lot of units just have armor piercing. So the fact that he's got loads of armor doesn't really make that much of a difference a lot of the time. It only helps against low tier rubbish, in which case you don't really need it for that. Yeah, they're not really an ideal unit for holding the line. Like 30 melee defense compared to Halberdier's 42 and Spearman's 42. Even the swordmen have a higher melee defense than the greatsword. So basically, they get hit in combat constantly. So my recommendation is just don't bother, especially considering they're more than twice the price of these guys here. I mean, I don't really recommend getting melee infantry in the first place, but Empire greatswords are truly a piece of crap. Alright, let's move on to the missile infantry. Okay, starting off with archers, we've this is a tier 0 unit, so you don't need a barracks to recruit it. I'm going to put it at B tier. These guys here, they're good for their price point, but they're not good units, right? They're just cheap. So recruiting spams of archers can be really effective, even into the late campaign. But, you know, they're not good quality, but they perform above their pay grade. So that's very useful for delivering the army loss penalty, because if one of them gets wiped out in the battle, the game doesn't really care that much. Whereas if you lose a greatsword, for example, because this one is worth like 3 times as much as an archer, or maybe twice as much as an archer unit, losing this unit here, the game will move you closer towards basically you losing the battle because of how the army losses work. Having low cost units that deliver above their pay grade is way more important than having high cost units that deliver below their pay grade, which is exactly what we get here. So that's why it gets a B tier. Then we move on to the they're called Free Company Militia. These guys here a little while ago probably would have put them at C tier, but I think they belong in B tier now because they are a tier 1 unit, so you do need a barracks to recruit it. But if you're using Volkmar the Grim or a Archlector, you can actually make these guys quite viable for a decent amount of time. Get their missile damage up, boost their stats a fair bit so they can be quite okay in melee. These guys here don't require melee infantry to support them at all. The only downside, I think, to them is that they are fairly low range, and for a gun unit, they don't have armor piercing, so they can be a little bit tricky to use. But I think you can get a lot of value out of them, and I've managed to do that myself, so I think they belong in B tier. Then we've got the crossbowman unit. This is a really versatile unit that is very reliable. Decent range, 160 range. You can boost that with Huntsman Generals by 12%. I'm going to put it at A tier because this is a good, sturdy early game unit. Get them at tier 2, definitely worth the price point. They can kill most early game units. Their biggest problem is going to be dealing with late game stuff that's really a lot of armor. And by that point, you definitely want to be phasing them out and getting the gunner unit, which is also what I'm going to put at A tier. Definitely not Doomstack material, because like comparing these guys to other Doomstackable missile infantry, such as Skaven Rattling Guns and Jezzails, nowhere near close to being as good as that. Or, you know, High Elven, what's it called? Sisters of Avalon, nowhere near as good. Dark Elf Shades, nowhere near as good. This is why in the Dwarf unit tier, I actually saw it on the Reddit, I've read a few of the comments, people were wondering why I was being inconsistent with the missile units, why Dwarf Missile Infantry were getting A tier, but Skaven Missile Infantry were getting Doomstack. Going on to that topic, a Skaven Doomstack is vastly better than a Dwarf Doomstack. Vastly, vastly better. Like the weapons team Doomstack dumps over any Dwarf army, dumps over any Empire army. They are insanely good if you know how to use them correctly. It's the same thing with the High Elves. The New World races, their max full strength armies are vastly superior to a lot of the Old World races. The advantages that the Old World races have is largely the fact that they're bound together and have a lot of options in that regard, and they also don't have these super powerful enemies right next to them, with a couple of exceptions. So if you're wondering why these guys here don't get Doomstack status, but the High Elves ones do, is because these guys here, if you put them into a spam, they will never perform anywhere near as well as like a Rattling Gun based army or anything like that, because the DPS is just miles apart. But they are still very good units. I just want to make that clear. Alright, so that's the missile infantry sorted. Let's move on to melee cavalry. Ooh, this is a sad and sorry group, this one. Alright, so Empire Knights, trash. This is an awful unit. My recommendation in recruiting cavalry is this. It's totally fine if you want to recruit cavalry, but cavalry that have under 75 speed, I think are not going to deliver value for you because, in my opinion, based on cavalry tactics, they need to be able to close the gaps very quickly, especially if there's enemy missile units there, because you're going to need to be able to get them to activate their skirmish mode and not shoot at you. Now, Empire Knights are heavily armored, and I don't value that armor very much because even basic archers can kill them. But their speed is only 66, and that's the biggest thing that hurts them. Also, their actual damage output is extremely low. So these are awful units. The main value that they have is armor, and the problem with armored units is that armor is massively overrated in terms of the auto resolve. It rates it really highly, but armor actually performs really badly in manually resolved battles, especially if that's the only thing they've got going for them, because melee defense, shields, missile resistance, physical resistance is simply a better way of protecting your units than armor. And if that's the only thing they've got going for them, then they're a piece of crap. And that's exactly the problem with Empire Knights. And when it comes to Reichsguard, they suffer from the exact same problem. 66 speed, heavily armored unit. They have better stats, but they're also more expensive. But the fact that they've got 66 speed is an absolute crippling part of what makes them not viable. If you're going to go with cavalry that have speed, like I said, you need to get at least 75. Then you've got Knights of the Blazing Sun. Now, these guys here, they used to only be able to be recruited in Backland, but you can actually now recruit them anywhere. It's just that they cost a lot more to maintain if you don't have the Knights of the Blazing Sun chapter house. So I think the price increase is like 75. It's a lot. It's like 70% or something. So 300 there, but I think it's like 480 that, or 420, I can't remember exactly, that Volkmar the Grim has to pay for his one because he starts off with one of these. Now these are slightly better than the Empire Knights and Reichsguard. Reichsguard requiring a separate building over here. Primarily because they've got a little bit of extra speed. So that 5 extra speed there is definitely good, but I gotta say, it's not 75 speed. They're just a little bit under where I would want them to be. And the Empire does have cavalry, melee cavalry, that has 75 speed. So my recommendation with Knights of the Blazing Sun is that they're trash, because if you want to reduce their upkeep costs, you need to get Talabheim, and that should not be a priority for you to confederate. What you want to be doing with Backland is, I mean, it depends on how you want to play, is you want to be farming them for Imperial Authority. So get their fealty up high and then farm them. Don't confederate them early. And I'm talking about confederating them around turn 100. At which point, do you really think that your Knights of the Blazing Sun are going to be able to handle Chosen as they're bearing down past Kislev? No, you should not be prioritizing this unit at all by that point. So my recommendation is don't ever bother with them. Very difficult to make them do some value. Overly expensive. You've got better choices. Now, moving on to the Demigryph Knights. Now, these guys here have 75 speed, which is, again, the minimum that I would want cavalry, heavy cavalry to have in order to actually perform well. Now, there's two variants, the anti-large halberd variant and the anti-infantry variant. My recommendation is that the anti-large variant is actually really good. I'd put it at B tier. And I'd put the anti-infantry variant at C tier. Now, these guys here take 3 turns to recruit. They're quite expensive, but these are good, reasonably reliable cavalry units, at least as far as a cavalry go in this game, because across the board, cavalry tend to perform pretty badly, but these are some of the highest performers. Now, the reason why you go with the halberd variant over the anti-infantry, it comes down to the roles that they perform on the battlefield. The Empire is exceptionally good at getting rid of enemy infantry. Like, they have so many tools at their disposal for obliterating enemy infantry, but they don't really have a lot of options for getting rid of enemy cavalry. So this unit here, its role being anti-infantry, is done better by other units in the roster, whereas this unit here being anti-large is actually kind of not necessarily needed, but its role is a bit more crucial than this one here, because you know, you could send this unit up against a unit of trolls, for example, and it'll smash it. It'll take out most enemy cavalry, as long as you're not fighting anti-large Bretonnian cavalry like Grail Knights. Be very careful about that. But if you're going up against Chaos Knights, as long as they don't have 9 tiers of experience versus yours 0, they should perform pretty well. As you know, as far as you can expect a cavalry unit, a melee cavalry unit to perform in Warhammer 2 on very hard battle difficulty, these guys here are arguably the most reliable cavalry unit that they have for melee, but still bit iffy. Just be careful with them because they can get wrecked pretty quickly if you send them up against a bunch of halberds. Okay, now we move on to missile cavalry. So the Empire missile cavalry is not too bad. They're definitely not the best in the game. I think the best missile cavalry actually belongs to High Elves with the Illyrian Reavers. Illyrian Reavers are really good. So Pistoliers, don't mind them. I usually don't recruit them just because I feel like their role is better. What they can do is done better by other units. But these guys here, I find they're fairly good against vampire counts because vampire counts can't fire back. So I'm gonna put this at B tier because it's like a cheap unit, and for its cost, because it's only tier 2, for its cost, Pistoliers can actually dish out quite a lot of damage. They can fire from a 360-degree angle at fairly low range. If you micro them correctly, they can do very well for you, but don't spam them. Very, very bad idea. So I would say this unit here is really good against the Empire's primary enemies. Oh, you know what? I missed something. Holy crap. I missed this one here. Missile Infantry. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to put this one here at A tier as well. It is a really good archery unit. Basically, it comes down to if you're in Lustria, recruit this. If you're in the Old World, recruit this. I totally missed that one. Sorry. Goofed it up a bit. Anyway, moving back to this. With the Pistoliers. So yeah, this is primarily really good against the Empire's main enemies of Norsca and Vampire counts, and Greenskins as well. Actually, if you end up fighting a lot of them, which can happen. So they're pretty good against them because they just can't really fire back very well, and these are faster than anything that those guys are going to have for the most part. You got to watch out for direwolves though. Okay, then we've got Outriders. Now, Outriders can be very finicky. I'm going to put them at C tier because they do have longer range and armor piercing, but they can't fire from all directions. So they're a lot more tricky to use. I'd say they're good in the early game, but they get less and less useful as the game goes on. So my recommendation is probably not get them. If you're going to get an Outrider unit, get yourself a grenade launcher. I'm going to put this at A tier here because while you don't... This is kind of like the Iron Drake of the Empire roster. You don't want to spam them by any means because they're only good against infantry, but they're really good at getting rid of lots of infantry. Their missile attack does a ton of damage. It's not super accurate, so shooting them into a blob once they've already crashed into your lines is really useful. Whereas if you're going to do that with sort of these guys here, then you might as well get more missile infantry. So this is a really good unit. Definitely recommend getting it. It's a little bit expensive to get because if we have a look here, you need to get both the cavalry building, which I almost never build, and also the artillery building, which I always build. So I just tend to not have access to them. But you know, it is a good unit, I think. So yeah, I'm gonna put that at A tier. All right. What do we classify these as? Okay, this one here, I'm gonna classify it as cavalry. And that one will be artillery. Okay, so the war wagons. Yeah. No. No. Nope. No. Yeah. Okay. Does it need to be said? War wagons are rubbish because they have low missile damage, low range, low speed, don't have much ammunition. Even if you offload all of your ammo into a target, it's very difficult for this unit to actually do its value. So the problem with it is that it's got too many stats that are high, I guess. It's got too many medium stats that it's not actually good at anything, but it's like not bad at anything either. And the problem is it's like not good at melee. It's not a great missile unit. It's just in this weird dead zone where units just shouldn't be, where it's a master of nothing and not specialized properly at all. So it's just a really bad unit. And my recommendation is just to never recruit it because you can get better results out of just about any other unit in your roster, except for melee infantry. Alright, so then we've got the war wagons with mortars. Now this one here is actually okay. So we're moving on to artillery now. War wagons with mortars. I guess it's okay to have like a mortar unit that's slightly lower range than the regular mortar. They don't fire from 360-degree angle, which is a little bit disappointing. And they have a hard time outrunning a lot of units because their speed's not very high. I'm going to put this one here at B tier because you can do a lot with it. It is a good-ish unit. Good-ish. But I'm like borderline putting it at C, so I'm just like barely putting it at B because you can get a lot of value out of this unit. And then the actual mortar unit, this is a really good artillery piece, especially for early game sieges. Not great at getting rid of towers, but it's so good at getting rid of garrisons. Just lob these shots right over the walls and they'll slaughter them. So generally, as a rule of thumb, you want one mortar for every tower that you want to demolish in a siege. So usually you want to probably bring about 3 or 4 of them in the early stages of the campaign. But it's relatively cheap. You should definitely prioritize getting them. This will sort out your sieges and really help you out in defensive battles as well, because as the enemy clumps up against your heroes or melee infantry, these guys here bombarding enemy infantry, it's just really good. And you don't have to worry too much about friendly fire. They're fairly accurate, unless you're shooting at like extreme ranges, in which case it's not accurate at all. But fairly reliable unit, that one. Then we move on to the great cannons. Yeah, great cannons are okay. I don't think that they're amazing. So if we have a look at the great cannons, they're recruited at tier 4, which is also the same tier that you get Hellstorm rocket batteries. Oh, hang on. It's also the same tier you get war wagon mortars. Ugh. Okay. I need to make an adjustment here. Yeah, that just dropped it down. Yeah. The fact that that's tier 4, you've already had access to mortars for a while by that point, because there's a big gap between tier 3 and tier 4 in terms of how long it takes, because getting to tier 3 requires 2 growth points, but getting to tier 4 requires 4 growth points, and each growth point that you get takes longer to get than the previous one. So it's like, you can get to tier 3 by like turn 10, but getting to tier 4 is like a turn 30 or 40 thing. There's a long time you've got to wait, and that's if you rush it. So yeah, this one here really does need to be a tier 3 unit. It does not perform at a tier 4 level. And when it comes down to Empire Great Cannons, I'd probably put it at B tier, because it's not a great tier 4 unit. I really feel like it should be tier 3, much like with the dwarfs, because that's what tier you get it with dwarfs. I know that the Empire grows a lot faster than the dwarfs, so it's quicker to get it, but still, the fact that it's at the same tier as Hellstorm rocket batteries makes it not really a great unit to use. Now, thing to note, I suppose, is that this is an anti-large, whereas Hellstorm rocket batteries are anti-infantry. So I just prefer that my anti-large be the handgunners. And since majority of the enemies that you'll go up against, majority, not all, are going to be infantry, the Hellstorm rocket battery is probably going to sort you out a lot. Most people that play this game tend to hire a lot of Hellstorm rocket batteries, and that is the correct thing to do, because this unit here is Doomstack worthy. Most of my relatively-ish mid-game armies are based around protecting the Hellstorm rocket batteries, because they've got one of the longest ranges out of any artillery unit in the game. They really good against the enemy AI, because the AI tends to blow up a lot and just obliterate its worth very quickly, because it uses up its ammunition really quickly. That's another thing with the Empire Great Cannons. It takes ages for them to reload, so getting all of its ammo actually unleashed in a pinch situation where you really needed to kill lots of damage quickly, it's not particularly good. It's better in a siege situation, that way you can just sit back and just let them shoot. But whereas these ones here are really good for field battles, as long as you're not in Lustry and you got trees and shit all over the place. So just be careful with that. Okay, then moving on to Hellblaster volley guns. This is also a really good unit. Really good for anti-large stuff, really versatile. It's kind of the Empire equivalent to organ guns. However, if we have a look at when we get them, they're a tier 5 unit. And by tier 5, I just feel like the Hellstorm, most of your armies will probably be full of Hellstorm rocket batteries and doing just fine. It's a good unit, don't get me wrong, but I don't feel like it's Doomstack worthy, so I'm going to put it at A tier. Okay, then we've got the Luminarch of Hysh, another pretty good unit. I usually don't get them because they're quite expensive and they have a habit of missing. But getting 1 or 2 of them in your army can provide a lot of value, especially against vampire accounts, if you're still fighting them by that point. So I'm actually going to put this one at A tier, but just be careful with it, that's for sure. I would say this unit here is worse when the enemy brings them because it massively reduces your Winds of Magic recharge rate, which is really bad for the player, but not so bad for the AI because the AI is really bad at using magic anyway. So you don't really try to hurt them where they're not really going to use it anyway. It's like kind of having like, oh, I'm going to reduce the enemy ammunition for vampire counts. You know, they're not going to use it anyway. The AI is very bad at using magic. I'd say this is best to bring against Dark Elves, but it's only super late campaign that you should ever really be fighting Dark Elves. I suppose Rakath shows up every now and again. Because, yeah, the Dark Elves are okay at using magic. They're okay at using dark magic, I should say. And then we've got the Steam Tank. Now, this one here, it's a bit iffy. I'm going to put it at Doomstack because you definitely can make a Doomstack out of it. But I would say use this information with caution because a Steam Tank Doomstack is insanely expensive. You are better off building a Hellstorm Rocket Battery based army where it's not full Hellstorm Rocket Batteries. This is like maybe 5 to 10 of them, and then just basing the other units around heroes and various of these troops here, not so much these. And you'd be able to build like 2 of these, maybe even 3 of them for every one of these that you build. Like if we go and have a look here at the base cost, Hellstorm Rocket Battery's base cost is 263, whereas these ones here, 550. They're pretty much twice the price. And as the supply line problem goes through the roof, as you got like 5, 6, 7, 8 armies, this becomes more and more pronounced as these units start to get to like 2,000 cost. Now, the Empire does have a pretty strong economy, and you can cheese it a little bit, so it's okay if you want to do that with Gelt or one other army. Definitely recommended getting a Life Wizard with it, because you can surprisingly heal metal stuff with life magic. It's good, it'll perform well, it's easy to use, but it's just very, very expensive, so just be careful it doesn't bankrupt you. But I reckon the best unit, the most the best unit that you should base most of your armies around for the Empire is the Hellstorm Rocket Batteries. This one here is the key winner for the Empire, and then it just trickles down from there. Every unit here is there to support this absolute infantry killer here. And this is also why when you're playing as Warriors of Chaos, and I tell people this all the goddamn time, don't recruit spams of Chosen, because the AI Empire is programmed to hire loads of Hellstorm Rocket Batteries, and these are just Chosen deleters, because they're armor piercing, and they just shoot indiscriminately, and Chosen are super slow. So by the time that you get to the front line, this unit here has already used up 75% of its ammo and killed 60% of your units before you've even dealt with the rest of their forces. So this one here, even when the AI is in charge of them, super deadly. So main thing you want to do usually is have them waste their ammo if you're not playing as the Empire. But anyway, that's the Empire unit list here. Not too many in the Doomstack, fairly balanced sort of roster, quite a lot of trash down here. I don't think anybody was expecting me to give these guys fairly high ranking. Most of you guys who watch me would probably have agreed with the greatswords down here, but I imagine this one here is going to get me a few dislikes. People will be like, how could you say greatswords are bad? They are very bad. They're one of the worst performers in the Empire roster on very hard battle difficulty for their price point. And that's the main thing to consider here, is that a unit needs to deliver its value. It can't just be, but my unit got 200 kills of peasants. Okay, that's not delivering its value. This is a tier 3 unit that costs a lot of money. It needs to deliver its value. It needs to be able to take on Chaos Warriors, which it can't. That's why it's getting the trash tier there. Anyway, that's the end of this one here. Don't forget to check out Instant Gaming, guys, because it's going to be a little while before we get any more Warhammer content, I think. So, it's a good opportunity to check out some of the DLCs and maybe get Mortal Empires if you haven't already. Highly recommend Mortal Empires over the Vortex campaign stuff. There are some good campaigns in the Vortex campaign, don't get me wrong, but most of my playtime on Warhammer 2, which by the way I have, where is it? I'll show up my Steam here. I have 12,000 hours in Warhammer 2, and majority of that is on Mortal Empires. So my recommendation is check that out, because it's only $13.13, which the Horned Rat approves. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time.